Mr. President, we have 14 days. 14 days by our own established deadline to do something about the Dreamers issue, about DACA. Why do we find ourselves at this place? Because on September the 5th of last year, President Trump, as well as Attorney General Sessions, announced the end of the DACA protection program as of March 5th this year. 780,000 young people who were undocumented in the United States but came here as children were given a chance by President Obama to stay legally, be able to work legally, and not fear deportation. 780,000 of them. For the most part, they're students and workers who are a vital part of the community, and they've done good things in their lives and promised to do even more. But the decision was made by President Trump to put an end to this program. When he made that decision, he also challenged Congress. He said, if we're going to end this executive order, do something, pass a law. Well, here we are, just about at the 5th month out of the 6-month period he gave us to get down to work, and nothing has happened. Some of us have been working on this issue, trying to address it on a bipartisan basis in the hopes that this Republican-controlled Congress would join with enough Democrats to solve the problem which the President presented. I worked with 5 of my colleagues, 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans together, to craft a bill which we believe addressed the issue in a fair way. Compromise was included in that bill, some that I didn't like at all, but that's the nature of a compromise and bipartisanship. We presented this bill to our colleagues, and we also attended a meeting on January the 9th, most of us, with President Trump, where he addressed this issue. Here it was 4 months after he'd issued the challenge to Congress, and he basically told us it's time to get this done. He said to us, and this was televised, so you can check my remarks if there's any question about what I'm saying. He said to us basically, send me a bill and I will sign it. I will take the political heat on this issue. And then the Republican leader on the House side, Kevin McCarthy, said it ought to include the following 4 elements. First, DACA and the Dreamers. Second, border security. Third, family reunification issues. And finally, the visa lottery system, diversity system, which we had established years ago. That's when I sat down and said to my fellow senators, Democrats and Republicans, our little gang, we have to get this done. The President has challenged us, and he said he's prepared to move forward if we can come up with a response. And so we did. We came to an agreement among ourselves, the 6 senators who'd been meeting. We presented it to the President through Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, a Republican, on January the 11th. He rejected it. And so as of today, we really don't have a bill before us, and we are starting anew with a conversation about what to do to meet the President's challenge, but equally, if not more important, to say to the 780,000 young people and those who were eligible to apply, this is what your future will be. We've had our ups and downs, a rocky weekend just a few days ago relative to funding the government and whether we were going to take this issue up. I thought it ended on a positive note when Senator McConnell came to the floor and made an express promise to this chamber, to members on both sides of the aisle. I'm going to try to characterize it, and I think this is accurate. Check the record if you don't think I say it quite right. But he said, if we have not reached an agreement on this issue by February the 8th, at that point we will open a process on the floor of the United States Senate with what he characterized as a level playing field and an open amendment process. That, to me, is an opportunity, but I hope that we can avoid that opportunity and reach an agreement, as he asked us to, by February 8th. We have 14 days left. I would like to involve the House in this conversation so we might reach a common agreement, but unfortunately they are on recess this week, and those of us who were sitting and talking about it don't have a chance to get together with them. However, I am heartened by the fact that a number of my colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle are going to join a number on the Democratic side of the aisle this afternoon and start what we hope will be a productive process to reach a bipartisan agreement and do it in a timely way, as suggested and challenged by Senator McConnell. Now, to achieve this goal, I think we understand that we're going to have to be mindful of one another and mindful of the realities that we face. There are a lot of issues relative to immigration. The list is pretty lengthy, and there are important issues that should be considered. It is unrealistic to think that we are going to propose or even agree on a bipartisan, comprehensive immigration bill in 14 days. What we can do is to address the President's challenge dealing with DACA and those DACA-eligible so-called dreamers. What we can do is address border security in a realistic and honest way. I took a look this morning at some of the publications of the Department of Homeland Security to try to get an understanding of what our challenge is when it comes to undocumented in the United States. Where do they come from? How do they come to this country, and how do they stay in this country if they don't have legal authority to do so? It turns out that each year, for example, the Department of Homeland Security tells us 50 million visitors come to the United States from visa waiver countries. Those who are visiting from those countries have not gone through an application process to visit the United States. They carry a passport from a country that we have an understanding or agreement with, that we can travel back and forth. Think about European countries, for example, that we travel extensively back and forth between the United States. Out of those 50 million, about 1.5% end up staying longer than they're supposed to. We end up with hundreds of thousands of undocumented people here by visa overstays. 40% of all those who are in this country undocumented came here by visa overstays. There is no wall that you can build on the border with Mexico or Canada that's going to solve that problem. This is a problem that really relies on technology, which we should be investing in, which we can invest in on a bipartisan basis. So if your true goal is the reduction of the undocumented in America and trying to make sure there is legal status for as many as possible, and you're looking at the incremental growth each year, you wouldn't look to the border first. You would look to the visa overstays first. Those are the ones who are slipping through the system, who should be policed and monitored with new technology. We've talked about it for decades. It's time to do something about it, but also to concede, as I said, no wall is going to stop that problem. No wall is going to solve that problem. In addition to that, when I take a look at the asylum issue, which I wouldn't say I'm amused, but I would say I'm interested, is the one that's always raised by the Department of Homeland Security, those who present themselves in the United States at the border or otherwise and suggest that they have a credible fear in returning to their home country. It's interesting to look at the statistics, because you find out that even though there may be this notion that they're primarily from Mexico, they're not. They are primarily from countries in the Northern Triangle of Central America, but there is a large contingent each year from China. So if we're talking about an asylum issue and not addressing all of the countries, the major suppliers of those seeking asylum in the United States, then we're not talking about it in honest terms or in its entirety, as we should. And I might mention that China, along with 22 other countries, does not even have an agreement with the United States in terms of deportation, according to the report of the Department of Homeland Security. There's a lot we can do there to make sure that China and those countries comply with the United States when we say we're deporting someone from your country that we find to be a danger to us. And rather than incarcerate them here, you get to have them back. They're yours. They shouldn't be here in the first place. So when we talk about dealing with the issues of undocumented, the issues of security in this country, many of these are not going to be solved with a wall. They're going to be solved if we deal with technology and look in honest terms and count real numbers about those coming from different parts of the world. I also want to address this issue about unaccompanied children coming to our border. I understand that challenge. The numbers have risen dramatically in prior years, and we have to take it seriously. I followed some of those children from the border to a protective gathering that they have in Chicago at a place called Heartland Alliance, and I went in to meet them. And I was shocked when I went into the cafeteria to see that some of these children were as young as 6 years of age. 6 years old, presenting themselves at a border of the United States. What circumstances could have led to that? It's possible it was a smuggler who either threatened or exploited a family and ended up with a child, pushed them across the border into the arms of one of our Border Patrol agents. That's possible. And that is something we should do everything we can to stop. That's an exploitation of that child. A child is likely to be abused in the process of this immigration, and it's something that we ought to do everything we can to discourage. But to simply turn away children at the border is a dangerous thing. What are we going to do with that 6-year-old from Honduras or El Salvador or Guatemala at the border when they establish, through a written note or whatever, that there's a credible fear for their returning to their country? Do we ignore it? Do we turn them back to their country regardless? We better be careful. Awful things can happen. And what do we do with the 12-year-old or 13-year-old girl who was a victim of rape and sexual assault in one of those countries, who was sent to the United States in our border because her parents believe she was about to be raped again or killed? Do we turn her back and send her back and ignore the reality? I commend to my colleagues and others who follow this debate an article that was written in the New Yorker last week by Sarah Stillman, and it was entitled "When Deportation Becomes a Death Sentence." And she followed the terrible story of a young woman who was undocumented, who was stopped, who said over and over again, "If you send me back to Mexico, that husband of mine is going to kill me. There's been protective orders issued. He's a dangerous man." She was sent back anyway, and she was killed. So these are complex situations, not easily answered with the common definition that anyone who presents himself at the border and says credible fear is going to be turned away without any consideration about the merits of that claim. We've got to be careful. Human lives hang in the balance. Our reputation as a caring, principled nation hangs in the balance as well. We need to do the right thing, stop the exploitation where it occurs, but also be mindful and sensitive to the fact that many people who do present themselves seeking asylum are truly leaving desperate circumstances and trying to find a safe place for themselves and their family. So the conversation continues this afternoon on a bipartisan basis among the senators in the United States Senate to meet the President's challenge, to accept that challenge, and to come up with a bipartisan measure. I don't know the position of the President of the United States now. I couldn't express it after the experience we had a couple weeks ago. I don't know where he stands. He has never issued anything by way of a suggested piece of legislation. We haven't heard from him. So we have to do our part. We have to meet our responsibility here in the Senate, hope that the House does the same, and that at some point the White House will join us in solving this problem, which the President actually created on September 5th of last year. I yield the floor and suggest the evidence of a quorum.